Okay, so now that we have our couch all UV mapped, we need to apply the texture that we made in Photoshop. So it's a simple diffuse color map and a bump map that we're going to apply. And what I'm going to do is since we're rendering an Arnold, we're going to use Arnold materials. So I'm just going to choose one of these guys, and I'm going to assign a brand new material. We'll call since it's Arnold, we'll use an Arnold shader. I'm in Maya 2017, so I'm going to use an AI standard material. If I thought that this had more translucency and light kind of going through, I would use an AI skin. If I were in Maya 2018, they've combined both of these into a material called AI standard surface. And if I were in Maya 2016, yes, bear with me. There is no Arnold, there's Mental Ray. So I wouldn't use an AI anything because they don't exist in there. I'd either use like a Lambert or something like that, and I'd render with Maya software, Mental Ray, one of those guys. So, but for right now, AI standard. So inside of here, in the color of the diffuse, I want to bring in my texture. Click on the little checker box. We want to use a file. And what we're going to do is in the name, click on the folder, and then choose the texture that you want to use. So yeah. Boop. Alrighty, so I've got that on there, but that fabric looks really huge. I mean, those would be, some ginormous threads. So we want to tile this. That's why we designed this texture this way. So I'm going to go to the placement node in the attribute editor off of the file that I just brought in, and I want to repeat the UVs. Let's try 4 by 4. That's height. Essentially think of it as height and width, up and down, left and right. That's much better, but it still could be tighter, so I'm going to boost that up. Let's try 8 by 8. And that's better yet. Um, let's try a little bit. Let's just see what a 10 by 10 looks like. I like that better. We want it to look like threads, not yarn. So that's better. Okay, so now I go back in and I go down to where the bump mapping is, and I bring in my bump map file. Never mind, there's sometimes an issue with refresh and stuff. But we're going to click in here, do the same thing. We wanted a file. And we're going to go in and bring in that bump map. Remember, 50% gray is white. White bumps up and black bumps down. We can see it's on there. That looks mighty rough. That's okay. What we would need to do is tile this the same number of times, which was 10 by 10. And that still doesn't look that appealing, so what we would do is we would go in, go up 1, up 2, and decrease the bump depth. It's way, 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 way too high. So we're going to change that. You never want it this high. We're going to drop that to like a 0.1. We see that looks okay. That looks much better. Maybe a 0.05. Just to give it just a little texture, just like that. And if that's, say, yeah, okay, kind of dig that. So now we have that, and we apply it. But for first, I'm going to go back to that material. And so I'm in the AI standard 4, which is the one that created, but I'm going to change its name to Fabric Matte 1. And we'll see why in just a second, because when I apply it to these other objects, now I know exactly which one to do. I select the top pillow, right click, assign an existing material. I don't have to make a brand new one for all of them, and I can just go Fabric Mat 1. Boop. I can also apply materials if I have them, like if I go here, there it is, select it, and then you'll see it highlight somewhere in here. When it's being good. There it is there. So if I select an object, I can right-click on the material itself, right-click and hold, and say Assign Material to Selection. I can also middle mouse drag it and drop it onto whatever objects that I want. Okay. So that all works well. But if I apply it to the couch, watch what happens. I'm going to apply it to the couch, and we could see it's not the same. This is tiled far more than this one is. But since it's the same material, if I fix this, then this gets too dense. It's just going to stay. So my choices are either I can change the UVs, maybe of the pillows, and shrink them down in the UV editor so that there's less pixels in one area, which will bring it closer to this. Or I could just duplicate the shader and then change the properties of the duplicate. So either one works well. It just depends on what your limitations are and stuff. So let's just see how to duplicate a shading network. So I'm in my Hypershade. Let me just select this one and click the input output so it shows me the entire link. I'm going to select my material, and in the Hypershade, go to Edit, Duplicate, Shading Network. And what you'll see is it now gives me an exact duplicate of my shading network. Then I apply, now we have Fabric 2, this one, and I just drag that onto the couch. And now I just change its settings. So we go to the texture. Let's try 14 by 14. And then we go to the bump. Oops, we did the bump. Let's do the texture. 14 by 14. And let's make sure that's applied. Assign material to select. There it is. It didn't attach. There we are. Thinking a little bit more. Let's try 16 by 16 and match the bump map to it. So I basically just want them to match up. And once I have those matched, we use the Arnold renderer just to take a quick look, see. And see if that actually worked out. Now, if I look at this and see like, hey, is this how I want it? Now that I'm using this guy, I could even start to tweak out some of the settings. And I've set it to a test resolution of 50%, so it'll render a little faster. And now I can make adjustments to kind of see. And right now I'm just affecting the pillows. The weight of the light in the diffusion. I can also adjust any kind of backlighting that you might see. It gives it a little more of a rim. Um, Specularity, if I turn that up a little bit, we see we can start to give, if we wanted to, like if this material was shiny or if it was a leather, you see I could start to give it a little bit of a vinyl or leather approach with the weight of the specularity. Now the roughness, you don't want it at 0 in this particular case because now it is a fully reflective thing, and now it is totally like a leather, even though the pattern of the texture itself doesn't match. And if I go all the way to 1, it totally gets rid of that. So I could still have shininess to it, but what's happening is it's not reflective at all, which in all honesty, I wouldn't want this to be reflective. But yes, you can actually start to, just so you can see, tweak some of these little fellas out. So if I were going for something that had a little bit of a sheen, give it just a little bit of weight, you get a little bit of specularity on it. I could even put that same image that's in the bump. Watch this, and then that'll finish it. I'm just working on the first one. So let's say I take that same image that's going to the bump, and I'm going to pull it out and plug it into the specular, yeah, the specular color itself. So what that basically means, and this is where it starts to chug a lot, is that's using that texture for the bump. So where it's like whiter is where it's going to be shinier, where it's darker is going to be where it's more dull. And then just simply going in, see it's plugged into the specular because we dragged it in, just so you can kind of see this. Now you can see it's actually taking up how the material itself is, and those white threads are now shinier. Now, of course, this is an exaggeration, and I wouldn't want to necessarily do it this way, but I just want you to see what it's doing. You give it just a little bit, and you see it starts to build up. The scene is not fully lit, so it's not going to give me the full effect, but this is also a good way that I can actually start to go in and even so, let's say I want to see where my bump was or how bumpy it was, I can start to crank it up. How it looks in this view may not be 100% of how it looks in the scene. So this is just a rough representation, but this is the actual render. So in other words, if I crank this up to a 1, we see it's like totally blown out here. Doesn't look that great. But I start to see some of it inside of the actual scene, and it's not quite as heavy because of the process it's using to render it. So even though this represents the bump map and you see it, because of the way it's being calculated and drawn, it's not 100% of a match to what you're seeing inside of the render itself. So I like to turn it down just so it's not an eyesore, but the render is the one that you're going to go off of. But just remember, whatever I did to that, I would probably have to change or either reduplicate it and make sure I have those settings on the second material that's also on this part.